Breaking Barriers.
Want to welcome you to another episode of Breaking Barriers podcast. I'm excited to interview this next guest. It's amazing the people you get to know through doing these interviews. And I have Dan Hutchings with me today. And there's just, it's been fun to walk in and just meet you, Dan. I mean, behind us are some old relics, and I know you tractor pulled yourself, but you've kind of gotten into restoring and have a little museum here. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this.
Oh boy, my background. Started out, probably I was 12 or 13 years old. We started out with the toy tractors with the Cox airplane engines on them, and cut up the old dune buggies and and we went all over the country with those. Back in the days before cell phones, you know, you got a carload of young boys taking off for Nebraska or northern Iowa or somewhere to go try tractor pulling. And it evolved from that. I didn't play Little League and all that, and a lot of my friends, we went to tractor pulls. That's what we did. And had a great time doing it, wouldn't trade it for nothing. Kind of evolved into other things. Back in it would have been the later 80s, I had old Minneapolis Moline on alcohol and ran it some of the Iowa tractor pullers and a little bit of TPM down there. Didn't know what I was doing, but had a good time for the most part. And so kind of got away from that a little bit. Let me back up. Back in the day, I kind of got in on the tail end of what I call the golden years. In that light class was the Jack Simons and Tom and Pat and Larry Lundry and Todd Prowley and just go on and so took a break for a while, went stock car racing with some of my friends, learned some things there that I actually later on applied to some tractor pulling. And then as time went on, the Twin States group was kind of starting to form. And so it was really local. It was, Bloomfield and Unionville, Missouri and Centerville and you could go pull and be back home and in bed by midnight. And I really, really liked that. And there were some really, really good guys in that. We had probably the best thing going in the country and wasn't smart enough to realize it. We got to changing rules, and I was as guilty as any of them, changing rules.
Think it's better.
Bigger turbo, bigger, better. And every time we changed the rule, we lost competitors and if we'd have just left it alone, we'd all be money ahead and fun. But anyway, then we kind of got away from that. My son, he started helping me, and he didn't have a summer job. He worked on pulling tractors. We had two at one time, and
they were both the light
limiteds and lights and light.
And then your son.
The son, he come along, and then he got to doing a lot of the driving and did really, really good for not being a farm kid per se. We didn't farm really anymore, but he picked it up really, really well. And I'll tell you one quick story. We were at the Iowa State Fair. I had about 3 goals in my life tractor pulling. As I wanted to be on TV. I pulled that off. Wanted to go to the State Fair, which we did that 2 or 3 times, and do well one time. And so back, we were running that light super, and at that time there were like 23 or 4 in the class, huge class. The track was just one of them State Fair tracks, and the big high winding alky burners just blowing the tires up and couldn't get a hold of nothing. And they were still racing cars then, and the track was banked quite a bit to the inside, to the left. And inevitably, them guys would go down through there, and they just start to the left, and they just have to shove so much brake into it. Took it off the end. Well, we were second from getting ready to go, and I don't know who was running, but they did that number of going to the left, and it just hit me. Go back to the stock car days. So we need to put stagger in this thing. So I took all the weights on the back bar, slid them all to the left, took the weights off the front belly bar, put them all on the left, slid the front end weights even over to the left, and we were sitting right beside Tom and Pat. Pat was driving, and he had fired up to go out, and he looked over at me and he says, "I just seen what you done, and I'm pissed because that's going to work." And it did. Yeah. He didn't have couldn't change the weights, and he went out and ate the left steaks, and we went down through there just straight as a string. And I think we got 5th place that day and got like $700 or $800. I mean, like we'd won the Daytona 500. Right. And so that I applied the stock car, stuff to the tractor pulling, and so then my son, he decided he wanted to go fast, so we got a 305 sprint car, and I don't know, that was, we had points of success and lots of points. Right. Scott Whitworth always said there was three phases of sprint car racing. You're slowing in the way, you're fast and you tear up a lot of stuff, and then you make it. Well, we kind of got mired down in phase 2. Yeah. Got fast, but tore up a lot of stuff. But anyway, and then he moved on. He's drag racing. We're drag racing now. So we go. We don't go so many times a year, but we go a long ways. We go to Kansas and Indiana and all that, and so that's where we get rid of.
And you've got a track pretty close.
Well, yeah, but say it's 8th mile, and the cars that he runs, it's turbocharged, and they don't get wound up till that second half of the track on the quarter mile. The second 8th, he gains 35 mile an hour. Right. It just that boost comes on, and then away you go. So let's dive into the beginning stages. When you're young, getting into the small toy tractors, and I want to we'll get some video or photos of those before we're done here in your museum. But where did you get started with that? Were there local events or what? One day we went and got the mail, and in the mail it was the Farm Journal. It was either I think maybe Successful Farming. I don't know if it was success. I think it might have been Successful Farming. There was an article in there from it was 2 guys down here at Sturgeon, Missouri. Yes. There's Randy Richards and Mike White, and they were truck pullers. Okay. Old tri-state truck pullers back in the day. And this would have been probably 1972 or 3. Right. And they had a couple of pictures in there, and then you could send them an envelope with a stamp, and they'd send you the plans to build one. And boy, I couldn't wait. And so we got them plans back and started building, and a lot of my friends, Tom White, Kevin Bogert, Larry White, just on and on and on. We all had them, and we had enough just here ourselves to have a pull. Okay. But then we got on the road to the big time. But anyway. Well, I knew and Kevin's off camera. I knew Kevin had done quite a bit of it, and then I guess you guys did too. So you guys started late teenage years, early? Yeah. And then how long did you do that? Oh, up until the girls and the fast cars became more interesting than toy tractors. And then like everything, we regress. Yeah. We go back to our beginnings, and we've had little pulls here in my shop, and just kind of us locals. Fun time. And takes us about a month to get them to run again. Right. They sit around. And then a year ago, Kevin and I went to the State Fair. We'd done some figuring. It was 50 years since we'd pulled up there the first time. And that's the minis. That's the toy tractors. Yeah. And so needless to say, our technology was still behind. We'd updated to some newer stuff, but even at that level, you got to stay on the button because the technology passes you up, and we were passed up. So I'm not saying we won't tie into another batch of them again. It's just kind of this pulling and all that. A guy told me one time was just like drugs and alcohol. You never can completely quit. Right. Well, there's a couple of things like that, because with what I do in my day job, I work with a lot of people, and there's just people that have addictive personalities, and they have addictions. And it's a matter of, sometimes it's drugs, alcohol, it may be work, it may be money, it may be hobbies, but it's usually something ties a person in, and it's better to have a hobby like this than some of those others I mentioned. You did that, then you got back into tractor pulling later. Do you have any of those old tractors you pulled anymore, like that Mini or any of that? No, I sold the Mini to the guy in Nebraska that was kind of the big Minneapolis Moline guy, and now I can't think of his name. I had built a set of aluminum heads for it, and I mean, You know,
when you did that, did you build the heads yourself?
Oh yeah, we did it all ourselves, and even
like you had a mill and you just took a block of aluminum. Because I've heard stories recently of guys did that on those.
We did, and then when we got into the Twin States stuff, we ran diesel, of course, and I had the pump shop here, and we did our own pump. The only thing that went out of house was like grinding a crank or stuff like that. We just did it all ourselves.
So when you were running the Twin States stuff, what class were you running in?
Yeah, we started out, it was like a single turbo 62 and a 65 or something like that.
Limited. You were
and then the Twin State and ECI had this rule kind of combined, where you could run the anything under 310, you could run the twins, and so we did that, and that was about the only way to make an Alice competitive. You just can't get any air in them, and you just had to compress it and shove it in.
So you went with two turbos.
Yeah, and the two turbos were. And it would really run. It would, and there again, we did it out of the junkyard. Them turbos. Top turbo was like an old T18, and the bottom was a 6. And went to Sam's Riverside salvage yard in Des Moines and got them, cleaned them up, put bearings in them, slapped them on, and away we went. It now today it's
that's nothing like what's happening today.
It's out of
control. The multiple turbos, guys still aren't pushing them the way you are the single blower. And the single turbo is supposed to save money, but I think it's almost counterproductive now because there's so much technology going into the wheel design, and you can't just go do what you did.
And you got to wind the motor up tighter. See, the twins, you couldn't wind the motor. You can wind them up, but not that tight.
Right.
And our biggest problem was folding up rods. We'd have them heat treated, and we'd do this and I got one hanging in the shop there. One year was towards the end of the year, and we had a data logger on it, even believe it or not. We just kept tweaking the water back and the timing, and we found the point. It was 125 on the boost, and the rods, they didn't break, they just bent. Yeah. And so then it was custom rods, and then you're shoving the crank out of it. And so
then they started heat treating them. Today on all those Alices, guys are running Cummins. They're not running the Alice anymore. The crank just wasn't built to take that kind of pressure. And so a lot of that's changed. How many years did you guys campaign those Alices?
Oh, I was probably 10, 12 years.
Okay.
All
right. Yeah. And then I see this a lot with other associations currently, because I'm currently in this game now. But back then, like you mentioned a little bit with Twin States and ECI, trying to match up some rules, because today that's very common. You can kind of take the class I'm in, and I can go just about anywhere and pull for the most part. Occasionally one will jump ahead on certain safety things you might have to add, but as far as cubic inch fuel pumps, turbos, they'll be same. Was that common back then, or were each association somewhat different?
Each association was somewhat different, and it just towards the end was when we tried to kind of merge them, because as we lost competitors, you needed to be able to jump back and forth, and that was a good thing about Iowa. Your whole state, you were under one set of rules, and of course your national rules is what you was really under. So
you started in the '80s pulling tractors, right?
Yeah.
Okay. ITPA was still somewhat a strong organization at that point, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then there was another organization at that point too.
Later on, there was Northeast Iowa.
Okay.
And they were all pro stock. That was all single turbo stuff and limited mods. I don't think you could have a blower on. It was all fuel injected. And there again, it kind of filled a niche, but it was a long ways to go from Bloomfield, Iowa, clear to Northeast, and it was. So I didn't run that many of them polls.
And then wasn't there a Southern Iowa group at one time?
Before the Iowa group kind of came into being, there was this Southeast Iowa tractor pullers.
Okay.
And I've got some stuff on them there in the museum.
I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, and when they started, then they were in the late '60s, early '70s. They were a way bigger deal than the Iowa tractor pullers.
Okay.
Way bigger, and their schedule card in there. 2 and 3 pulls a day,
right?
And in pretty much Southeast Iowa, they'd get to the Des Moines area, but Bloomfield, Centerville, Donaldson, Richland, just on and on and on, just right kind of in that area.
So today we have a lot of county fairs that'll put on a tractor pull. But it seems like you guys, what you're talking about, some of that might have been county fairs, but some of it was just like a town putting on
there was
their
just a
town
lot of
event.
celebrations, Lions clubs and fire departments and civic organizations. There was as many of them or more maybe than the county fairs, because you just have one county fair in a county and one time a year,
Right, and I think that's what we've lost a little, is like the JCs, the Lions clubs, and some of those that put on those events. I don't like to see it, but I don't see young folks getting as involved in those. It doesn't matter what town I go to. It seems like the age group of those groups have gotten older, and then it makes it tougher, and you got to compete with all the other things going on.
Your volunteer base, and I don't care if it's little town Iowa or whatever, it's Kansas, dwindling. Nebraska. There's so many things to do. Families, I've been on the fair board here since 1980 probably, and our nucleus of volunteers is dwindling all the time. Families, they play ball and they do this and they do that, and the old tried and true farm folks, I hate to say that, but it's true, are few and far between now. My dad, his dad, they'd get the work done kind of in the summer, and they'd go and work at the fairgrounds and get ready for the fair. And but the desire's there. A lot of people have the desire, but it's just they work. Mom works, dad works, kids in school. It's almost impossible to get done.
And when my kids were young, I was caught in that same thing. They were doing sporting events, and that whole thing has shifted. You guys, or even my age, you went and played a high school or played Little League in town, and it was a shorter season. You went home, and of course we had to work on the farm, so that was just very common. And you're losing those farm kids as well.
Yeah.
When did you start collecting tractors or modifieds and things like that?
Well, I don't know, 10 years ago, I guess, probably. The old M there behind us was setting up at McKim's Agco dealership there in Oskaloosa. They'd got it. It came from just down the road in Beacon, the little town of Beacon, kind of.
And who was the original owner of that?
Orrin Scott was the guy's name, and it was sitting there. They took the back wheels and tires off of it. They wanted the tires. The rest of it was getting ready to go in the scrap dumpster, and no, we're not doing that. So I drug it home, and kind of started from there.
Okay. So. And then we'll get some. So you put the tires on the back. That was
I come up with another set of wheels and tires, and
that was just an antique puller, or was it?
Oh no, it was. They were the top of the line back then. Okay. They were in this Orrin Scott. He was a relative of the Britons, and the Britons were in Blakesburg, and they had the sled, and they put on the poles. The Britons did. And this old tractor over here, it was in Rod and Custom magazine in an article back in 1970.
Oh wow!
That they had written about the pull in Oskaloosa that they'd put on, and a lot of pictures and a lot of things. And this tractor pulled at the state fair. Back then you had to qualify. You had to go to these local pulls and win and qualify to go to the state fair. And And they're on the west side of the grounds, there along that southeast 30th Street where the old racehorse barns was. That was where they pulled tractors. They didn't pull them on the racetrack.
Okay.
And I can remember going to the tractor pulls there on the road there along the old racehorse barns where there's just a lot. They had tons of tractors and mostly big stuff. Not a lot of hot rods, but some of them guys, it was just bigger in life when you're 12 years old or 13. That's that's so cool, and but it pulled there. This tractor here, it came from
on that one then. So they put a V8 in it.
Oh yeah,
what's in it? I mean, that's what you remember seeing as a kid.
Yeah.
And so that would have been considered a modified, though.
That would have been a hot rod.
A hot rod, right?
That's
right.
Rods.
I like that. I keep calling them modified.
Yeah, that's the hot rod class,
But they had a hood and tin work on it.
And that tractor, there's a million stories about it. hood ornament, it's got the chrome girly hood ornament on it. You know. Well, in the pictures that I had of it, it was on. So I asked this Orrin. I only got to meet him a couple of times before he died. And he said, "Well, that hood ornament, guy who had a little salvage yard there in Oskaloosa. He brought that down one night. We were working on this. Needs to go. If you're ever done with it, I want it back." Well, so they give it when they park the tractor. They give it back to him. Well, his son inherited the business. Got a hold of his son just out of clear blue sky, and he said, "Well, you're not going to believe this," but he said, "That hood ornament's here on the shelf in the office. Been here for 35 years. He said, I've been going to throw it away 2 or 3 times. He said, somebody might want that. Well, he said, I've got the home for it. Same way with the headers. The headers on it were 409 Chevy Super Stock back when you could go buy a race car from the dealership. And so they took that set of headers, and today would be priceless. You know, somebody restoring one of the cars. They whacked them off and turned them upside down, welded them back together. And they survived in this Dale Littlejohn's machine shed up overhead. He said, I had them in my hand twice to throw them away, and he said, oh, somebody might want them someday. There you go. And the headers and the hood ornament came back home.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was just
I'm just
uncanny.
Looking over there thinking, what else? Yeah, the dash layout.
Yeah, they had a speedometer on it, because see, they had a lot of speedometer speed limit classes.
Right.
The frame rails, or the weight rack on the front frame rails would slide in and out, because different clubs had different length limits, you know. And so they'd slide it out. Well, if they'd bounce the front end, they'd bend them. They'd have to go find a tree somewhere, bash it into a tree to show they could haul it down the road. But
oh my gosh.
The old Orrin told me one time, he said, you know, that thing will run 60 miles an hour. He said, about 30, that old front end gets to shaking, you know. And he said, but if you just pin her down, she smooths right out. And so, you know, the cops actually got after him on the Beacon Blacktop for speeding.
Running it down the road.
He said, if you're going to have it out here on the road, you got to put a tail light on it. So they put a tail light on it. But,
so they'd take Connecticut out and test it.
Yeah, I wouldn't run, I think 60 mile an hour down the road if you know, any amount of money.
Well, we had no idea about safety the way we do today.
No.
They can get the death wobble you'd never recover from.
Oh, yeah. So she just smooths
and the tires
right
aren't
out.
made for that either, so that's a whole nother deal.
Oh, yeah.
Any other stories you remember about that M?
Oh, about the hood ornament and the headers and
is that motor the original motor?
No, it doesn't.
A
lot of these motors, I have never gotten a
try
with an original motor. They blew up, or they took them out, put them in something else, or.
But that's a 409, and that's what
a 409, yeah.
And that's what they ran.
That's what they ran in them. That was 409s were kind of the predecessor of the big blocks, you know, the 427s and 454s. They were actually a pretty pitiful motor. They would run 6,500 RPM, pretty easy. Anything past that, the push rods are in just this crazy angles, and they couldn't keep push rods in, and rockers and.
So you had mentioned the sled that his relatives had.
Yeah.
And that was a mechanical sled, I would imagine, by then.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm sure, hand or homemade.
Oh, all homemade.
But that was probably a sled that transitioned from the drag days where you would step on a sled.
Yeah.
And so, do you remember much about that, or what?
A little. I and this is another story from Orrin. They would tow it to the pull behind a 2-ton Chevy truck, and on the flatbed of the Chevy truck was rails, and they had these hang weights.
Right.
And they couldn't put the weights on the sled and tow it down the road. So they would get to a pull, they'd drop the sled, they'd back the truck up beside the sled, one by one, put those hang weights over on the weight box of the sled, have the pull was over, everybody else was sitting in the shade tree drinking beer or getting ready to go to another pull later in the day, back up to the sled, all the hang weights one by one. You know, you ask somebody to do that today, they just pass out.
That's hard on a few rotator cuffs.
Oh, yeah.
That's how they did it. And then a lot of the guys that pulled back then, I mean, I've interviewed where they'd pull the 7,500 or whatever, 77, they'd pull the 9,000 or 95, and then they'd end up at the 12,000. And they were swinging weights and sliding wheel weights in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gosh, he said you want to take a couple of your nephews or somebody with you just to move all the weight around. Do you know that sled, they used a weight box? Because some of them, I recall, would put a tractor on them too, but that wasn't one of them that did that.
They could put a small tractor on the pan.
On the pan,
Yeah,
so they would
yeah,
do that. Because
yeah.
I was young, but I remember seeing that, and then depending on the class, they would put a bigger tractor on it sometimes and things like that.
Yeah.
So those guys probably hit a lot of that eastern Iowa area with that sled.
They of course, Southeast Iowa pullers, and
Yeah.
it was the Southeast Iowa sled, and
Yeah.
it was a well organized, highly successful deal. It just
So the Southeast Iowa Association, this is something that it becomes more difficult for people to know the history on that. That kind of went away as the ITPA got more popular because ITPA was tied into NTPA.
and it was over the safety stuff and the insurance. And,
Okay.
And the Southeast Iowa deal kind of went away, and as the statewide club
Right.
then.
And then a lot of that went to ITPA became the statewide club, and then of course later Twin States kind of hits the northern Missouri, southern Iowa area, still does. And then ECI is kind of, up in east central Iowa. And we got Outlaws who've kind of, I think, did ITPA end up there with the Outlaws? Do you have any history on that?
It's basically one and the same, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew there was some merging that went on there. Just the late 80s, that farm crisis was really hard on the sport of tractor pulling.
That slowed it down a lot.
And I just remember as a kid wondering if it was going to kill it, which was disappointing. A lot of people quit pulling in that era and never come back. Tell me a little bit about this tractor here. This would have been considered a hot rod, obviously, as well, but a lot more hand-built than that M.
This one is pretty crude.
Right.
That's what they did. That's what they had to work with. It came from West Point, Nebraska. I actually bought it in Lincoln. A guy named Alvin Meyer had it in West Point, and it's actually a 55 Massey rear end, which is way heavy. It just terribly heavy, but indestructible.
Right.
You could put 2 blower Chevy motors on one of them and just no problem. Whereas the M's and the 88 Olivers and all that, after about 1 blower motor, then they couldn't. And then if they tried to run heavier weights, but those old Massey rear ends are indestructible but heavy. And
did it create a weight issue then?
You couldn't get one into the 5 at all.
Okay.
A friend of mine in Missouri, John Gibbs, he had one in a mod that had one of them Ford tank motors in it. And he never tore the rear end up, but he struggled to get it down in the weight classes. But
because I knew a lot of guys ran the Montgomery Wards and like the F-20s and some of those rear ends in the beginning.
Yeah, but they would handle one injected motor and 5,000-6,000 pounds.
Yeah.
But you put a blower on one and
yeah.
But no, this has got the early Hemi in it, and that's the guys that bought it from Lincoln. They won the motor for a street rod. So, and they never did use it, but whatever. But anyway, I bought it from them as a rolling chassis. Really, it was all there. It was.
So this is the motor that.
No, this isn't the motor, but all the rest of it was all there. I just built that motor and stuck in it, and
they would run automatic transmissions.
Yeah.
Which one was that? What transmission?
727.
Okay.
Yeah. The Dodge transmissions were just excellent, and they.
Got a spacer in there.
Yeah, got a. Just because the old Hemis had a big old cast iron transmission.
Right.
But so they back in the dragster days, that's the motor they used in the early nitro dragsters, but you look at it, it's so crude, and the safety equipment, on either one of them, pretty marginal. It's got hand brakes, foot throttle. And the transmission, the shifter for the automatic is just a deck lever off an old lawnmower or some kind. It had the different notches in for the different gears, but
kind of like the reinforcement here.
Yeah,
too,
the material you could tell was out of an old building or something.
Right.
People just used what they had. And to stiffen it up, if you look underneath. There's a big piece of pipe that runs the full length of the frame.
So you see, there's a radiator hose, but there's a big pipe back
and
behind
that pipe done 2 things. It stiffened the frame, and it was the radiator. They run coolant in the, and But the tire, you know,
and that's why this hose from the back of that tube runs back forward.
And there's so much coolant in it, you wouldn't get hot.
Right.
You never pass through the motor about twice, you know. But they just innovation, you know. They just kind of pulled it out. And
I would say I've seen some a lot more crude than this, though. I mean, they certainly, you know, had, and I'm sure they had to have something around the back of the transmission, and even that, I mean.
See, that's covers the drive shaft, and you know, you're setting it right astraddle of the drive shaft, and it's about a 2.5 foot drive shaft between the rear end and the automatic. But
and I'm sure the trike front end was probably off that Massey too.
It was like a 44. See, your 55s were an old standard tread Wheatland tractor, and they had a big heavy wide front axle, and they got bearings and supports in them. You cannot believe that. Those just last forever.
So the motor you found, that was that easy to find? Or?
This early Hemi stuff is really, it's everywhere.
Okay.
It is just everywhere.
It's the later
place
ones.
in North Carolina, if you've got a big enough credit card, you can get any piece you want.
Okay.
Block. If you got a block and a crank, heads, they got the rest.
So it runs.
Oh yeah. And there's still a lot of them. Of course, they put them in a lot of things, you know, the cars and the trucks and industrial. There's a lot of them industrial engines, you know, generators and military surplus, and so then they drag raced them for years.
Didn't really know what they had. Just the heads were monsters.
Oh yeah,
back in that day.
Yeah.
So, how long have you had this one?
6 years probably.
And how'd you come across it again? Were you looking for
Marketplace?
Oh, it was on Marketplace.
I was just dumbing along and
found it there.
And tractor pulling tractor, and there it was. And I was kind of reluctant to begin with. Oh, do I need another project? And so I called the guy, and I kind of okay. So it was cheap enough. I spent more in gas going out there to get it than I paid for it, but.
Original tires or wheels?
Yeah, them. Believe it or not, them are the original tires, and they were both up, and they're weathered bad.
Right,
but they
do the job.
Yeah, I wouldn't hook onto it with the sled for $1 million. It's just so fragile. The engine's okay, but I don't want to wind it up. And them old tires and that I just
don't want to stress in that
it's not worth it. Plus, there's no safety equipment on the stuff. And
was the drive shaft in this cover?
Every bit of it was
all there.
Yeah, so every bit of it was there.
That's original.
I didn't have to fabricate virtually anything.
Did you know anything about this tractor?
No, I didn't.
Okay,
I didn't. People remember it from out there. A lot of the outlaw pullers from that West Point area. Oh yeah, we remember that guy. Was there any relatives? Well, he never married, never had any kids or anything. And
what was his name?
Alvin Meyer.
So if any of you know anything about Alvin Meyer, any stories, please comment in the comments or drop a note in the comments and let us know a little bit about it. We'd like to find some history out about this.
Yeah, that would be great. And they've got a little museum at the fairgrounds there in West Point, and I contacted them. Then, well, no, we just don't really have anything. But it
was probably his hobby and what he did.
Yeah, he just kind of did his own thing.
No, it's very interesting. I love the history on these old hot rods. It seemed like that was probably a entry-level price point for a lot of them to get into.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, there's nothing cheap about the modifieds today.
No,
because that's a whole different deal. What did they run straight gasoline in both of these, or were they running?
They were airplane gas.
Okay, so they were running.
This tractor, I think, might have had an alcohol setup on it.
Okay,
I didn't. Because I didn't have one at the time. I look around for something and I change them around a little bit.
Right.
But I've got an old tractor down there over the hill that I don't know if I'll ever get to it or not. It was an M that came from the northern Oklahoma or southern Oklahoma, northern Texas area, and it had a full-blown Donovan aluminum Hemi in it. Back it was an aluminum version of this. Blower on and everything. I mean, it was bad. It was
bad to the bone.
It was bad to the bone, and that motor is going to be hard to find. You know, a guy could put a cast iron motor in it and a blower, but it's 2 or 3 projects down the line. Yeah, honestly.
So you when you restore these, are you doing all the paint work and all the restoration?
I do the paint. Yeah. And, I sandblasted this one, I guess. No, I had it done. That one there, I sandblasted myself.
Okay.
But then just did all the paint work. I did have a buddy who runs a body shop in town do the hoods on that M.
Right.
But I painted all the rest of it, and you know, it's just hard to get somebody to do this kind of work, and so.
Well, it's really one-off. It's not.
Oh yeah.
A lot of these body shops, they're on a production.
Well,
basis.
yeah, deer, $10,000 deer hit they can do in a day or so, and
this is a lot of pieces.
That's a lot of work, and yeah.
What was, and I know with the piece we got behind us, we're going to get to that. So what's a lot of the innovation and technology that you've seen over the years? I mean, we can start with this if you want, because I know it's in a video somewhere. And maybe, was it in one I had posted? That you've seen this? There was somebody.
Oh, this thing right here?
This thing right here.
This right here. Yeah. This is the, how do we get it, keep it in the screen, keep it in the film. This was the ether pole.
Okay.
And in one of your videos that you posted, it was Dean Proctor.
Let's point it out towards the camera there.
Where people can
kind of see the end of that thing.
Okay, I can't. Anyway, Dean Proctor, they had him and Dwayne, their dad had this D21 that they bought from Ralph Mathis.
Right. And then it's just a wire. And
it's just got a wire.
What is that, Romex or something casing that they run it through?
Just a piece of conduit.
Yeah, well, but I mean the tape is holding some like
I don't know what that is.
So
Don't even remember. But anyway, to get that thing lit, it was decompressed so far. They'd have to, Dwayne or somebody would have to come up right in front of the wheel, and just as it was ready to go, he'd have to give it 2 or 3 shots more of ether to get it to take, you know, on the light, and it was dangerous. It was dumb to do that. But anyway.
Because they're in front of the back tire.
They're in front, standing right in front of the back wheel, and Crier clutch, and it's going to go. If it takes, it's going to go, you know. And so the track officials, like old Stan Burton and some of them, got to raising hell with Dwayne about standing right in front of that wheel. So my friend Larry White, he came up with this idea, and like I said, I'll keep it in the frame here of the thing.
Right.
But where you could stand off, well, what, 6, 8, 7 foot from the tractor, as Dean would be winding it up, and he'd pull the lever, and there you go. She'd give her that last little shot of ether.
You're gonna have me on the floor here in a minute.
And and to get it lit. See.
Yeah, we'll put it back.
And so that we were setting up one time at the state fair, kind of in between sessions. We went up, sat in the grandstand there in the West End. And quiet, and we were sitting there talking, some guys sitting in front of us talking, and they was talking, you could tell they were kind of knew their business, you know. One of them said, yeah, he said, I remember these guys with this Alice Chalmers, and they'd have to stand beside it and ether it, and he said, this guy come out with this can of ether on the end of a stick, and you know, and so tapped the guy on the shoulder, and I said that was him right there. Said he built we call it the ether pole, and so that, you know, it's just the guys in front of us, you know, and here we are, you know. But that tractor was incredible for its time. The technology, it wasn't that technical, but what made that tractor tick was those intercoolers.
Right.
It had 2. They were Mack truck. I'm sure they were Mack truck, but they were their own self-contained. They didn't bolt to the motor.
That's interesting.
And the seat was made. It was a tank.
Okay.
With an L-shaped tank.
Right.
The seat was bolted in the L shape. And I don't know how much water it held. But my friend Larry that made the ether pole there, he used to go with them quite a bit. And he did the ice, and
the L tank was the ice.
water tank, and with the ice in it.
Right.
And they would put in excess of 100 pounds of ice. They had an old deep freeze that they hauled around with them on the trailer back in the old days, and they used the 2-ton truck to haul around. And they would go to stop the gas station and just buy them out of ice.
Right.
And they would put in excess of 100 pounds of ice in that tank for a run. And if you notice in that one video of where Dwayne's shooting the ether in it,
I seen that. I didn't know what he was.
When Dean's just about ready to go, he reaches down there through the steering with his left hand, flips that switch. Well, that turned them coolers on. And there was a pump on each side, and they were a pretty big centrifugal pump, and they were driven with Ford starter motors. And they would pump tremendous volume and pressure. And each pump was hooked to one of those coolers. And you would they'd make a run, and that 120, 30 pounds of ice they'd put in it, completely gone, and crack the valve at the bottom of the tank, and you just warm water like you'd want to wash your hands out. So that is what made that tractor go.
Right.
That cold, dense air didn't burn pistons up. People were starting to experiment with water injection, and that's of course what it is today.
Right.
Everything's,
Well,
water.
they use intercoolers, but it would be more down that would have been in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because a lot of guys were bolting them, were still getting like bolt-on intercoolers and trying to fabricate those. And I didn't realize they had this style, but this is probably the earliest that they were separate from bolting on a manifold style.
Yeah.
And those worked somewhat, but they didn't do anything close to this.
Like I said, and I don't know who dreamed that up, if it was Ralph or that Ron Fix was kind of Ralph's mechanic and all that stuff. And so, it worked at the time, and it worked for a long time. They were the cream of the crop for several years, and finally, technology got to them.
Right.
And
so they were a single blower or multi?
It was twins.
Yeah. And then diesel, if I remember
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
So.
And the injection pump set off here to the side was belt driven.
Yeah. Oh, for the fuel injection pump.
Yeah.
And then boost pump, I mean, just again in the early 80s, or for the lift pump for the diesel fuel, did they have, what were they using?
Hydraulic pump.
Okay. Which is similar to what would be used today yet. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about that, but then what are some other things that you've seen change from all that innovation? Because clearly intercoolers like that was way ahead of its time.
Well, the safety is what, these tractors are death traps, honestly, in today's, but back then, they didn't know any different, But sadly, it took an accident or somebody getting hurt or worse to get those safety innovations put in. One thing in the steel fly was that one thing, back with Twin States and all them, all steel fly wheels, all, everything. That was what I really admired about them. They were sticklers on the safety part.
Right.
And now we were limited on a lot of other things, but there was no question, steel flywheel, steel clutch, blanket, the wide front ends and the fenders and the throttles and all that was that.
How soon did you guys go to like a dead man throttle? And the dead man, just for you folks that know, it's just spring loaded. So if something happens to the operator.
That was before my time, even.
70s
See, even these old tractors have
that.
Throttle return.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I knew that was kind of an early safety feature.
That was probably the first one. Yeah.
And then of course, like today, you'd have a blanket over the transmission. A lot of folks maybe can't see that, but that happens. And of course, the covers. They'll have to have some type of cover on a drive shaft on any modified.
The wide front ends and the fenders and now the roll cages and
even as far now as we're on the turbos, we're going to blankets over the turbos. We've got crosses, and some of them. One organization now for sure, front and back both. By next year, I imagine most everybody will have that
and the cables. On the super stock stuff and the cables around the motor keep coming apart. They come apart, but it just keeps them contained anyway.
So, any other creative things you guys did like this?
Oh, everything was creative. Just getting there was creative sometimes.
What'd you pull them with the early days, like your mini mow?
Oh, I had a 6.2 Chevy van. Conversion van. It was a 3/4. It was like a 1-ton van.
Right.
And it actually did a pretty good job.
Could pile everybody in.
Yeah, pile everybody in, and then I got a old gas 4-door dually, and it'd pass everything but the gas station.
Right.
And then of course, had to do this. Well, I bought this truck off Vern Huser. He'd bought a guy, pickup pulling guy out in Illinois. And the guy's name was Dagwood. That's what the truck's name was. So we always called that old truck Dagwood. It was an old cab over white, all stretched out. And we used it. We used it called old Dagwood. And then
you could load the tractors on the back.
Yeah, and had a beaver tail. But it was actually a handy old truck. And then, of course, everybody started playing the semi game. So we got a furniture van, and my son was at Indian Hills at the time, and we got sponsorship, Oh, wow. And they paid for painting the trailer and put their stuff on it, and had an old cab over Freightliner. I was always cab over kind of guy, too dumb to get a real truck.
Oh, I don't know. They're pretty cool.
They're cool. and so we towed with that for a long time, and that's when we had the two, and we could put two in there. And it was nice because you just leave them in there. As long as it wasn't broke down, you just leave them in there.
Go to the next pole, add fuel and water. Yeah. And you were running water injection by then. For sure. Probably using the Simpson setup.
No, homemade. I took a 12-volt snowplow pump.
Okay.
And instead of oil in it, just run water with crop oil to lube it just a little bit. And see, I never had any automatic water. Everybody had so much boost. We always had a button on the throttle.
Okay.
And sometimes you didn't want that water coming on. I never thought you needed water until you're up and rolling.
Right.
And we'd get it up, get it wound up, get it lit, and get it rolling, and then squeeze the button and turn the water on. And then at the end, just as you spinning out and you knew you were done, let off the water before you pull off the throttle. That way it doesn't have that big wad of water in there to do something with, see. I always thought it was easier on stuff, because
you pulled up into the 90s with those.
Yeah.
So you were still doing that system there.
Out to the end, yeah.
Because
it worked fine.
And I know I hear a lot of people did that. They had ag pumps, all kinds of sprayer pumps, used different things. It's just for the audience to understand. Now it's all automatic, pretty much built off of boost pressure. So when it hits 30, 35 psi, it comes on, and once you get the other end, dump it. And but it'll spit it back out the front. You have water to contend with at that point. Diesel fuel you were running back then in your tractors, were you running pump fuel? What type of fuel were you running at that point?
Pump fuel with a lot of stanidine additive in it.
Okay. So. Were they testing the cetane levels or any of that?
Towards the end.
Yeah,
towards the end.
And then they weren't testing the water yet you're putting in?
No.
Okay. Did you get crazy with any alcohol in it?
No, really. It worked. We didn't burn things down. And I didn't want to work on it. I just wanted to, go and run it. And we did good enough. A lot of ECI shows, we'd get, I don't know if we ever, we won, I guess, one or two. But, you get a third and second and all that. And if you drove it on the trailer, hey, we won,
Right. It gets real expensive when you start.
And the time to work on it,
No, I just know people were mixing things. I've interviewed people on here who, somebody'd walk over and, hey, pour some of this in, and it wasn't measured, so you just poured in the tank, and then it'd run like a son of a gun till it didn't
burn something
burn
down,
holes
and
through
then
the pistons.
And I just didn't want that.
Yeah. What's one of the things that, if you look back over all the tractor pulling, you did it with your son. One thing I hear a lot is what a family sport it is. Is that part of what drove you to get back into it with tractors and your son, or is just you enjoyed the sport?
I enjoyed it, and then he liked it too, but I'll tell you, and I'll be honest with you, my problem was, and it was my fault, and it was all self-inflicted. I tried to be the booking agent for the Twin States and try to put on a lot of the pulls and make sure that somebody was there to run the roller and somebody was there to run the box blade and and everybody shows up and everything, and I probably neglected taking care of my own business.
Okay.
And does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does.
it hurt. It hurt the deal, and he wanted to go off and do other things, and it's fine. We did. We do it today, and we get along great, but that hurt. I shouldn't have done it, but I did.
Well, it takes a lot of I can tell because you've served on the fair board for many years, and just with other things that you've been involved in. I encourage young people to get in and donate back to their communities and do those things. I don't think it happens as much as it once did. So there are good causes, but sometimes there's that balance, and I've been caught in the same thing. How much time do you donate? Because people like to tell you you're good at it. But you still
I felt like I need to keep perpetuating the sport. I need to keep this going. I need to keep and it probably would have kept going with or without me doing it. So.
Right. So, but then, do you know where your tractors went?
My Alice tractors went to Greg Lassetto. Done some trading with him and whatever, and I was ready to get out. It was just time to get out. And I think they kept one in the family out there, and the other one went to North Dakota, South Dakota, something like that. But
you don't know if they're still being used?
Yeah, I think really? So. Yeah, okay. I seen it. I think was my old tractor. I had 80-10 sheet metal on it. That hoods
on both of them.
Oh no, there was an XT and then this 80-20.
Okay. And the other, what was the XT then? Just
XT hood, tin work on it. And I guess I forgot one tractor. I had a 180 too, and that was early in Twin States. I forgot about it. I sold it to a guy in Cross Timbers, Missouri.
Okay.
He hauled boats for one of them. Half the boats in the world are made right down there in the Ozarks, in Springfield.
Yes. And
I sold it to him, and I don't know what club down there that he done run it with, but it actually had a little history to it. It come from the East Coast, this Pennsylvania, this Dale Smoker.
Okay.
He run national events.
Right.
It finished, I don't know, it didn't win, but it was in the top 4 or 5 national points one year.
Okay.
He was from Cochranville, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And so I got it with no motor, and it had the good stuff in the rear end. It had the old boy that made all the gears for all the Alices. It had them gears in it, and
so it was ready to go. Other than a motor, you
got
a rolling chassis.
Just need the motor. And
what classes did that one run in? Then?
Oh, that light Twin State.
And that's what you ran.
Yeah,
always.
That was
Okay.
And I forgot about that. I'd like to find of all the tractors, I wouldn't mind to find that. So anybody out there that knows this guy who's in Cross Timbers, Missouri, it's on Highway 65. There's you're going to Branson. Get a hold of me.
Was there a name on it?
There wasn't no name on
Okay.
it. No.
So if you see it,
and I'd put different tin on it. I'd put that 8670 Alice tin hood. The hood tipped up. I like things the hood tips up.
Right.
I hate wrestling hoods, and so even I've got an old XT down there now that would kind of I call it farmy stalky.
Yeah.
Kind of. And I even made it so the hood tips up. I don't like wrestling them hoods around because most of the time by myself anyway. And so
well, even mine International had that 3-piece hood, and it's got a little framework and everything's welded together, so you can at least get it out of the way.
But that's kind of where everything went. So
okay. Did any of the last two have names?
Called the last one, the one with the 80-10 sheet metal on it. Called it the Warrior because out of the Indian Hills College was the Warriors.
Okay.
And so, but we peeled got rid of all the Indian Hill stuff before we got rid of it.
Yeah. And I just asked that because if people know where that tractor's at, they might recognize the name more than
all that was gone off of it. We got rid of
tractor. But if they know when you pulled it, and that's what it was called. All of those were would have been what they consider the light limited, right?
The light limited,
Single turbo.
Well, then towards the end of the Twin State deal and the ECI, we were running the ECI too. It had the twins.
Okay.
So
410 cubes.
Well, you couldn't run twins on the 410. You could run 310. You could run twins.
And then you run that.
And then and that, like I said, that was the only way to make the Alice go.
I believe those are pretty much phased out now.
They're
I don't
obsolete.
think there's any. There's about 2 years ago, I believe, the last one that I was aware of.
When they changed it, it's up. It's up to them. But when they changed that rule to let you put the big block IH in there, that was the end of the line for the Alice's.
Right.
Kinzenballs and Maverick and Tom O'Brien and them guys, would just think of the past.
Right. It was hard for them to compete with that. What's your involvement in tractor pulling at this point?
Farmy stalky.
Okay, so that's what you do with that other.
That's the old 190 down. Just farmy stalky.
Just go out and hit local county fair or two.
Yeah, or even less. The Drakesville Reunion and Pulaski Corn Show and Blakesburg Corn Carnival. And, just
get into some of those.
Yeah, and Jeff White's got the sled there. He just come from you can almost see the house from here across the field. And his dad, they had mini rods, and his Jeff and them's mother was actually Phil Aylward's sister. And so that's how the pulling, kind of
got to them.
Yeah, and
which the Aylward, for those that don't know, Lee Aylward pulled a 966 or was it a 1066?
Pulled an 856 to begin with.
856, okay.
Yeah,
I don't recall that.
Then got a 10.
1066. And then the boys also, a couple of them pulled, didn't they?
Phil pulled. He had a 1256, and then he I don't think Phil ever went past the 1256. He would drive his dad's tractor once in a while.
Yeah. I just recall those guys would pull with ITPA and come up, or Lee did, and came up to the Kelowna pull and a couple of those that we would see. I think Cedar Rapids once in a while. Yeah. So,
but anyway, he's got the sled, and as long as Jeff's got the sled, and his son Dan's kind of doing some of it now, but he will still have a little bit of tractor pulling in this area. I'll tell you, when you lose a sled out of an area, it just kills
goes away. So that sled, where did it originate from?
Well, they built it.
They built it themselves.
And it's the second version. It's the third or fourth version. I've got video of the West Grove Labor Day sub-pulling garden tractors, and Alan had this little step-on sled of a thing, and then they built a kind of a mini rod sled, and then they built a pretty good size sled for a farm and antique stuff. And they sold it to the Newtons down there at Donaldson, and then Newton sold it to John Gibbs in Moberly, Missouri, and John Gibbs still has a finger in it, I think, but that Missouri Farm Pullers uses
that.
And then Jeff and his dad, before he died, they built this sled they've got now.
Okay.
So.
And then they're doing a lot of the local farm stock stuff.
A lot of the antiques and classics and the farm stocks and
it's designed more like the more modern ones now.
Oh yeah,
it's not a ramped up.
Yeah,
like the early ones had like the old bush sled. One was that's got some hooking on those which I did once is very different. Which you would have pulled a lot more of that style of a sled.
Oh yeah.
I mean you were pulling it from the very first inch. The ones now, you're picking the front end up and trying to get momentum. And
get a run at it, and then they drop the hammer on you, just all racetrack stuff there. But
kind of a drag race with a sled behind you now, which back then is kind of a horsepower, just a different setup. But what, any favorite memories of yours over the years that just with friends, things that happen? It doesn't even need to be with one of yours, just.
Well, of course, the toy tractor pulling was great fun, and that getting the 5th place at the state fair, that was a big deal. That was a big deal.
How far undergunned were you to get that? That was when you moved the weights and staggered?
That's where we put the weight.
I thought you were maybe going to say you changed air pressure in the tires.
No, I didn't have time because it just dawned on me, and the people, Twin State people, friends for life.
Right.
Tom and Pat to this day, still great friends.
Right.
Brittany just over north here a little bit, it would be the friends, yeah.
I find that interesting that you say that because pretty much everybody does. And what I was not prepared for when I got into tractor pulling, and it was something my son and I could do together, and we're at that stage of life. was, you know, I'd raced motocross. I'd gotten into some car racing and derby cars, and especially in the derby cars, a lot of those guys like to fight you if you win. And,
No.
you know, tractor pulling is.
I never went to a fight at a demo derby. Oh. Yeah.
You went to a fight in a demo derby, broke out. That was about how that worked.
Yeah.
And they're fun memories, but the thing that's so unique with tractor pulling, it's such a family atmosphere to this day.
Yeah.
Certainly you're trying to hide some secrets, but you know, I've had it to where I've had a problem and I've had people walk up and say, hey, I've got a turbo in the trailer and I got this or that and you need any help, and pretty soon they're like, okay, you got it covered. They'll start backing away again, but it's just, to me, that's really unique.
Yeah.
And it's one thing I like to, even when I started this podcast, I just did a few episodes because I was kind of doing some other podcasts, and the people that have just enjoy the history of the sport, it's just amazing how they tie that back together. And to me, it's been a wonderful experience because I've met so many great people through it all.
I like preserving these old tractors. You know, these guys that restore tractors that do it for real and big time. You know, everything's perfect and flawless, and and the paint's perfect. And not that you want to do a good job restoring these, but they were crude to begin with.
You want it to fit. You want to save some of the welds that got a little splatter.
And people see these things and they just can't believe that was, well, this was the norm.
Yeah, I mean, just looking, it looks like they welded another 4 inches on the front, and I suppose at some point
they run out.
They run out of either iron or
somebody
they want to move the weights out.
Change the rules, we'll
just adjust it.
We'll just adjust, So.
Yeah. No, it's been a wonderful experience to get involved with this, and I just look back at and even as I talk and I look at how they built the bracing to tie this in, is just kind of interesting. It's all
that's a well rod, that somebody
and then they just made a little fabricated bracket and keep welding on it till it held, but it's very unique. If we don't, my goal is, I guess, to preserve the history of the sport. I lost my father 40 years ago in May, and my kids really don't know him outside of a few stories they hear. And what has happened with a lot of this, you talked about earlier, I guess, about how farm kids, the farms are bigger, farm kids are leaving the farm. And it's amazing to me, within 2 generations, they hardly know what Grandpa did. They don't know this story anymore. And so to get the family to come back and leave comments, that's what it's about. So, and I like to share that. I share that on a lot of podcasts, but I also want people to reach out if they have family members that they would like to have interviewed, even sons of, if they've lost their dad and things like that. I like to interview those because it's a piece of history they can hang on to forever. So.
Breaking barriers.